just talk to him. Yeah, just have the conversation with this guy.
Stuff she shouldn't have to deal with once you know everything.
No, that's great. Oh, thank you. Right, because the story we're sharing is God's story ultimately. That was great.
Good. I like that.
My name is Heather Shane. It used to be Heather Freeman for some of you who've been around a long time. And I think I started going to Johnson Street when I was 3 weeks old. And besides kind of a little hiatus in college, have been there ever since. I think that's a really difficult question to just say one thing that I appreciate about this church family, because this church family basically raised me from 3 weeks old in the nursery to Bible class to youth group and through my college and married life and now raising my kids. But I think that the one thing that has been probably most influential in my life is just the church family itself and the people here at Johnson Street. People that go beyond my blood, but they're sometimes more family than my own blood. I can't thank my parents enough for raising me not only to know God, but to be a part of this church, because I've been prayed for, I've been prayed over, I've been lifted up, sometimes been held accountable whenever I needed to, but this church is, it's the longest relationship that I've had in my life besides my parents is with this church, and so it's huge. Well, when I heard that the prompt was, what is one thing that God has taught you? I immediately was like, well, I can't just boil it down to one thing, because I obviously like to talk a lot. So I think that there's things that have come in my story and in my journey that have just kept coming up that God has taught me. I would say the big maybe defining factor moment in our life was when Derek and I first got married, and we started struggling with infertility. We struggled for 6 years. And as we're walking down that road, some of the truths that had always been taught growing up kind of started getting twisted. And I think Satan really worked on me and kind of whispering in my ear, you know what, God doesn't love you. You know, even something that you learn from the very first thing that you're taught is Jesus loves me, and how many times I've sang that song, but I can remember him saying, you know, if God really loved you, he would give you a baby. And so it was one of those things that I think through that struggle of infertility, probably about 4 years in, I really just felt God calling me and seeking this relationship with me and telling me, you know, I do love you, how much I love you, how much I want to heap that on you, but it's my timing and not yours. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that I had to struggle with, and knowing that he loved me and knowing that he had a plan for me and knowing that it was out of my control was something that was really hard for me. As most of you know, about 6 years after we started our struggle, and through a lot of prayers from this church and others, God answered our prayers. And what I love about the way that he answered it is it wasn't my plan, it was not my idea. I prayed for one baby and he gave us two, and then a short time later gave us another one that it wasn't the way that we had envisioned our life, but it's so much better and so much sweeter than anything I could ever have pictured. I think my 3 children are obviously proof of what God's done in our life. But sometimes I think that story is, even though it didn't necessarily feel nice and neat, not everything in life is nice and neat. Not everybody has that happy ending at the end. We went through a time this past year and where when Tucker and Adeline were made, and through the process of in vitro, there was 2 frozen embryos that were made. We just felt that we were following God's commands. We felt like we were doing what God wanted us to do. And that answer was no. And I think that sometimes it's nice to tell that nice story when everything works out and the end result is good, and sometimes the answer is no. And I think that can relate to so many other things in your life. And I think that during this year, I really struggled with that. Really struggled with wondering, God, I know you have a plan for me. I just don't understand what it is. Through this time, I really have felt that my God is still the same God, whether the answer is yes or no. And He still loves us, whether the answer is yes or no, the same way I love my children. I think the biggest thing that I've learned is through all of those things, God's never left my side. In the good times and in the hard times, and times where I'm happy with Him and the times where I'm a little frustrated with Him, He's big enough to handle it. And for a while, I chose to be sad and mad and frustrated and not understand. And I think what kept coming into my heart was that it was time for me to choose joy. Sometimes we may not understand what God's plan is for us, but just how much better it could ever be. So, and then the verse I wanted to share, because this was really something that I think is meaningful for my life, but it's from Isaiah 43:2, and it says, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned." And I think that's one of the, in good and bad, God's always with us. So. My name is Heather, and that's my story. You have a story, and it's all a part of God's story, and it's a story worth sharing.